How's it going, everybody? My name is Eulier Gonzalez, and in today's video we're going to talk about testing, which is a section from this course taught by Brian Holt that allows to write this production ready React application. So here in this course, Brian Holt show us what are the techniques and tools that allow us to do that. So who is Brian Holt? So he is a software engineer that has previously worked at Reddit, Netflix, Microsoft. He was also the PM at Snowflake, which is a data as a service, data lake as a service. And he's currently the VP of product at SQLite Cloud. So bringing his robust experience on how we can write these kind of applications. And quite frankly, that's part of our job, especially if we are going to dedicate to the software development, specifically with React applications. So you can think yourself as someone pretty much like a football player or a NFL player, NBA player. So you provide is your skills, expertise to a team, so you can work together in that team as a way to thrive in that industry. Good. So with that perspective, okay, and also what are the techniques and tools that we're gonna see, or that I already saw in this course, which is, well, code splitting, server-side rendering, transitions, and what we're gonna talk about is testing, and tools like Tailwind, TypeScript, and Redux. So I don't want to dive too much in all of these sections. I'm just going to briefly describe what is the value proposition of each one of them. Remember that after all, this React framework is a tool built by Facebook to solve Facebook problems. So hooks in that would take a look at, for example, use ref, use ID, use layout, use callback, use memo, use reducer, all right? Tailwinds, which allow us to write these little tiny CSS classes. And we also look at the anatomy, the compiler, the transpiler, and the auto prefixers. How can we set up that? How can we extend from Tailwind? And also how helpful it is when it comes to define different layers per breakpoint. So for example, mobile or desktop, mobile, tablet, desktop, and large screens. Advanced techniques like code splitting and server-side rendering, that before React 18 that was something quite hard to make that or to play. They're not placed nicely, but now with the version 18 they do that. So code splitting is just a way of how you can fetch only the necessary code that teach your app to set up, and while showing something to the user, you hurry up everything in the background. And in the server-side rendering is on the initial load, you're going to pre-render you're gonna pre-render the page and send it to the client. While you do that, so the client can see the content in the background, now you replace the old instance of the component in the client with this new version of your component that contain is the interactivity. Therefore, you can now, or the user can interact with your application. There's some challenge there. There are also some way of doing this kind of thing. And again, after all, remember that this is to solve. So what you're doing is that what are the techniques that top tech company are using as a way to provide a best user experience. So yeah, there's a lot of mechanism in there. There's a lot of machinery in there. That was quite actually a very interesting topic to learn about it. Low priority rendering. So you have use defer value, use transition as a way to say, hey, let me notify React that we are going to load something heavier and do something about it, or let me talk to React to do something about it with this heavy thing that I got here. And then we got is TypeScript. So TypeScript, after all, is this, in the case of VS Code, is this live coding documentation about the intent that you or someone else had when they wrote that code. And that's pretty compelling, because now you can see is not only the intent, but also is what is the shape of the data, and you prevent is errors that happen at runtime. Again, it's a trade-off here. Here we look at what is the anatomy of the tool, like the TypeScript, the compiler, what is generated, how we can make it work nicely with ESLint, what are the libraries that allow us to do that, how can we start migrating our applications, what will be a recommended way, how can we do that for example, our models or any component that is rendered outside of the normal render done, as well as you can start with your servers. We can look also at how you can migrate from GSX to TSX, like the React components, your context, third-party libraries, for example, if you're using React Query or Redux. And then how you can now also see how you can do user interactions. And after all, no matter at which level you are or which percentage you are in your migration, okay, from 10 to 60, it'll be misery. It'll be misery. Oh, yes. And the idea here is that the more you do that, the less you fight the compiler. Why is this misery? Because you're not sure that the TypeScript is being finicky about it, or if it's truly tell you a TypeScript error. In other words, that's great, that's good, because there is also a couple script that you would like to set, or you should have set in your React project, like in your React project, okay, like let's go to link this code, give a proper format, and type check that. After that, then we look at how can we now use those scripts in our CI/CD as a way to ensure that the code that is going to production actually work as expected, and we have confidence that our work will work. That Redux is this tool that allows to store the app data, or allowed to store is app level data, okay? Because we usually store data is in our React components to manage any UI changes, but when it comes to now manage the business logic, data from the business logic, for example, if you're building a e-commerce, users, orders, product, catalogs, if you're building is a field service management, you got dispatcher, ticket, orders, drivers, perhaps, or technicians. So with that, okay, the thing here is, well, With Redux allows to store that kind of data. It's a third-party library because after all, React is React only take cares about is to re-render that component. That's it. And with Redux, it's all about storing and managing this app level data. So I look at how you can create that. You can create your or configure your store. The concept known as slice. What are slices? How you can create a slice by passing the name, the initial value, the reducers. What are reducers? Which is just a fancy name for saying this is a function that takes a previous state and an action to generate a new bit of actions. And then how after that we look at how can we now store data using dispatch? How can we retrieve data using the use selector? Okay, how we should be careful when using that. You only want to fetch the minimal amount of data. The reason to that is because otherwise, if this is a subscription, because if you fetch an object that is big enough, that any property that change, Redux say, hey, one of these property changed, therefore I'm going to reroute this component. And you don't want that. That's bad. So fetch only the necessary data from that, or select only the property, only the bare minimum data. Okay. So then we look now at how can we do this data fetching using React RTK query. For that, how can we create that? In our case, how can we create our APIs or our service on the front end code, and how this RTK query it will generate a custom hooks for us. So anytime, for example, our state or app level state change, we just call that data. So we hit the endpoints. We also can provide some catching mechanism, invalidations, polling by adding is a middleware to our store. Again, there are better alternatives when it comes to actually sync data or update data with the server, like React query. But if you're still working with Redux, go full into RTK query. I also look at the React Dev tool, something very, very important and powerful to do that, and especially one of the most compelling things of Redux Dev tool is not only the ability to time travel debugging, but also that you can, for example, let's say your user crashed your app, okay? You can dump the Redux history to any of error logging service. You get that, put into your React Dev tool, and essentially you are time travel debugging through the user crashing your app. That's pretty compelling, completely, man. So that's that. This is it in the case of Redux. And now finally is testing. Testing is the last section of this course. Buckle up. And this is the favorite topic for every software developer. It's not. The idea here is that because this is one of the things that I really don't like to do that. This is my least favorite thing. And my least favorite thing is flaggy tests. Alright? Because I don't want to dedicate my time to that. I want to know very well about how on the industry we do this kind of thing, because some companies require you to do that, perhaps for their shareholders, to show them as a way to say, hey, look at all of this green flag, we got this, right? All of this test coverage and that kind of thing. The idea here also with testing is that depend on the type of test. is that give us much more confident about that the core that the code work as expected. Okay. So if we, for example, make an analogy here with an English essay where you say the code formatting is like, hey, this is how we align our paragraph. With ESLink, we're saying, hey, this is the proper English writing style. Okay. With TypeScript, we say, hey, this is an article? Yes. Is this article fit here? Okay. Is this is a noun? Good. If this noun fits here, okay. If this is a verb, yes, and so on and so forth. And with unit testing, we're saying, hey, is this is a paragraph? Is this paragraph makes sense with the another paragraph? You know, that's a good analogy here. All right. So testing. Here we are. In today's video, we're gonna talk about is snapshots. Okay, and walk through, for example, testing some recommendations by Brian Hall's methodology of doing this. For example, when it comes to write your test, don't write novels about it. I just want to know what failed. That's it. Okay. Also, write tests from the user, or try to write tests from the user perspective. Like if your user are using your app. Test functionality or behavior, not implementation. Okay. And the other is when you're, for example, when you're trying to fix a bug, fixing a bug, okay, write a test that failed that, fix it, and the benefit of that is that you don't only have a record that you fixed that bug, but you prevent any regressions. Very, very important. I will argue that you should add, for example, is the number of the ticket from that bug. That'll be something good to keep track of that. When you say, hey, this is being already done, this is being fixed, so we prevent any regression for that. Or you can also put is under your test is the ticket that solved that. That may be another good way to put it. All right. And now a little bit of history. Okay. Oh, and the other is develop a habit to deleting tests, especially flaky tests. The only flaky test that is allowed is E2E and APIs endpoints. Anything else, you should develop the habit to remove that, as well as don't test UI elements because they constantly change. So a little bit of history here of how do we get here to look at testing this techniques is that with testing we now inherit from something called Jasmine, and Jasmine is this testing framework that now Jess made this Facebook product also based on Jasmine, where they made that open source in 2013-14, if I recall that right. And now the V-Test is the spiritual successor of Yes. So with V-Test, we can now run this test in parallel, and we have now one pipeline to run not only our build step, but also our test. Something that before you have to rely on different pipelines or different tools to do that. So in any case, here we are. Because of that, all right, V test is this testing framework. We got the testing library that allows to test is UI components, in our case React components. You can also use that for testing any other components, Svelte components, Vue, Angular. In our cases with React, this exposes a nice little helper functions to query our components and to actually write tests about that, because something that we don't have that before, and it was quite painful to do that. And also it exposed some convenient features in the case of React, like, okay, let's go to render this component inside of a DOM, where now this is when Happy DOM kicks in. So this is a lightweight version of Happy GS DOM, which is a no implementation of the DOM. Remember that, because this is something that you're going to you're gonna refresh your concept of Node by working with Jest, and you're gonna get familiar with that, especially with this environment where we're going to run our tests. Okay, if you want to use a browser for that, because after all this is something that is slow, you can go with Playwright, Cypress to do this end-to-end testing. Usually you do that is for your logging. And it is also important to be very specific and have a very good reason to do to run a E2E test, because that's something they are expensive, they're flaky, that kind of thing. Anyway, so with those components, right, we look at how can we install them, how can we set up our v-test, okay, where by just only running through the vt, we notify so hey, let's go to now enable is the sorry, let's go to enable is from our vt config, from this model bundler, dev server, from one particular tool. Now we can identify is that, hey, this is the environment or the test environment that we're gonna use. Back in the old day, we have again two different tools that actually manage that. But luckily for us, Evan Yu, the creator of Vue, actually made this. So I'm very, very happy that that's the case. And then we look at how we can write our first test. We can start by using the test folder like this. This is known as the dunder, the thing that sits at the bottom of a bottle from boiled cane sugar in the distillation of rum. Okay, that's quite interesting. This is a Python thing, according to Brian Hall. And the idea here is that anytime you define this folder, vt, we're gonna say, hey, let's go to actually look at any test here and let's go to run that. Or you can use, for example, this the .spec.js to actually run your test. So that's the way how you can notify the model bundler or the dev server, hey, this is our test. Okay. And then we started to write our first component. How can we render that? Okay, how can we test our component, React component? First, by hey, let's go to guarantee that we actually are passing the proper props and we getting the proper output. That's quite simple. The main use case from this is to verify is the element actually renders properly. Okay, Yep, is the component actually rendered properly? And then we look at what are these particular functions that be exposed for us, which is we have this global things that it introduces these little indirections. So we need to go to the docs to actually see what are the variables that we make use. Now it's much more compelling to be descriptive about what are the variables functions that we're using. Thanks for doing that. We also use something called render as a way to mount this component in the test environment, as well as pet. Okay, so far so good. Okay, and this is what we can use from that. We can use is defined by test ID, which is something that is widely used as a way to test this component with data test ID. And then you say, okay, this is our component. This is the data tag that we're going to add to our component as a way to verify that based on the proper value that we're passing, you are render or we are getting the proper output. So far, so good. That actually is quite straightforward. Now, the other is testing user interactions. And here is where now you have to be quite familiar about what are the methods that testing libraries expose us as a way to work with, as well as how can we now write our test. Okay, remember, be very succinct and descriptive. And again, the render function that comes from testing library expose some convenience functions to test our component as well as our expectation. So that's good. That's fine, because in your case, this adopt pet component that we got here is actually using the browser router provider, we are using here is the React router, okay, which it is the browser router, a provider, okay, as a way to provide all of this mechanism to detect when the URL changes. This is the proper component you need to show to the user. So doing that is quite very complicated, and that's why I say, okay, great, and shout out to the people that actually is working on React router, which is the same people that are behind the Remix, this new upcoming framework that wants to compete with Next and Gatsby. Okay, so that's great. That's fine. Because after that, all right. Because after that, since this component is make use of that, all right, we need to find a way to wrap that component, to notify to our test environment, hey, let's go to mock this provider. And that's the way how we can do that, since we are running is a no implementation. So far so good. So the other type of test is how can you test hooks, okay, custom hooks. So thanks that custom hooks is a way to abstract the logic, and we can test it independently, unlike effect, which is kind of hard to do that. So the question is that how you can test a custom hook or a hook that only works inside of React. So you want to test something outside of React that only works in React. The answer is you can't, unless you provide is the environment. required to do that. And that's exactly what this custom hook is all about. Especially when you're testing that, you say, okay, let me now provide the necessary components, or in this case, the React environment, mock that, and then we can now is test our custom hook. So we have an old way to do that. That's quite silly. That is like, okay, let me now is yeah, there we got it. So let me now is to define a React component where, after all, this is just a JavaScript function. It's going to use that custom hook inside of our React functions, and then we're going to return nothing. So our function that wrap that React component, it will render that mount component and pass through all of the lifecycle hooks, okay? And then we're gonna return is the value from the custom hook. Again, this might be quite silly to do that, but it works. So now we got a new way of doing that, which involves is this render hook that comes from the testing library, where it say, hey, you know what? Instead of doing that, give me is the custom hooks, as well as an option called wrapper, where where you can provide all of the providers and required component needed to make this component work as expected. Okay, and we're gonna render is the children component as it is. So once you await for that, okay, because after all, this is the result from that, you're gonna get that right now synchronous. Okay, so once we test or once we run our hook, okay, and we pass through all of these necessary components that all the necessary provider that this component needs to, the lifecycle hooks on React, then I'm going to return is an object called result that you can take a look now at the current, where you're going to have the custom data that you're looking for. That's interesting. That's very, very, very interesting. So again, this is the new way of doing that. Okay, so far so good. And now is the testing mocks. So when we talk about testing mocks, especially, which is something that I am not quite fan of, that is a thing that the more you mock in your code, the less confident you will have on your test, because it works on that set of rules, or that set of constraints you provide, that can be quite close to the production or not. But in any case, so don't do the only flag it has that I allow is the API response, as well as the A to E. Okay, so here we're gonna test, we're gonna mock is a function, especially if we want to now, for example, test our custom hook, and a custom hook that is making an async call. So for example, in our custom hook we set is the React query, okay, to actually, so one of the great things of React query is say, hey, here's the key that you're gonna catch, here's the URL, here's the refetch method. Okay, and this refetch method we use is the fetch function. So how can we do that? Okay, since we don't want to actually make we don't want to hit the server, especially you can imagine the scenario where there is a lot of people actually writing tests and hammering the API. You don't want that. So we're going to now mock a function, specifically fetch. So there are a lot of functions out there, or libraries that allow you to mock this, which are very small pieces of software, intuitive, that are very, very intuitive. In our case, we're using is this, and also notify to our test runner the test to say, hey, before running any tests, please set up this thing for us. Set up this configuration. In this case, set up or make or mock or fetch globally. Again, this is part of their code bases. Mock or fetch globally. So here, as you may expect, it's like, hey, you're passing this V environment, or the V test environment, okay, that might add a mock to the fetch function. So anytime the testing library that tag is a fetch function that you're using some fetch or this particular function, you say, hey, please, let's go to mock that. Okay. So in your proper component, this is something useful not only for fetching, not only for mocking fetch, which I will assume that this is one of the great use case for that. You can think of also of any other async operations or any async functions that you might want to do that. Again, this is something that is very narrow specific, and most likely for big company, where now what they care is that you are actually talking to the server, so that the client, the server communication exists. Good. All right. So on that line, okay, on the fashion, then we look at this. How can we now use this inside of our test? Again, this is something that you can take a look at the documentation. The whole point of this is to say, hey, I want now is to mock these functions, and when you call this function once, okay, which is what it's doing here, when you call this function once, I want you to return this data. This is what it's doing. So mock response once, and then let's go into now actually render the proper data, pass through the lifecycle hooks there. In our case, we're using something called wait for, because after all, we are running is this async operation inside of this component, inside of our custom hook. All right, we have to wait for the data to be low, and the way to do that is using this wait for function. Okay, and then you're gonna run this function to say, hey, we expect to be success. We expect that the result from that is from those hooks is actually that is successful. That the fetch mock data return with a success. Okay, and then you want to actually check if that actually worked as expected, and that you get the data as it is, right? So this is how you can mock data. Okay, and again, you have is mocks that allow you is to say, hey, it's going to replace the implementation of this function with something that actually doesn't work as expected, so with some mock. Okay, we don't want the actual function run, we just want it to return if it is with this couple data. This is what mocks are doing. It's saying, hey, I want you to know the implementation details, replace that with this mock. And if we call that, return this. Whereas with spy, you can say, please let me know how many times this function has been called. Okay. Again, this is two particularly approach of how you can test, how you can write your test. And finally, we are now take a look at snapshots. So what I'm gonna do is to take at the frontend master course that I'm gonna take notes out of that. You won't see what I'm doing. So let's go. Let's get into it.
Test coverage because I think it's dumb. I think it's dumb because for the most I am not a fan of seeking 100% test coverage. I am not a fan of seeking 100% test coverage because I think it's dumb.
Okay. Okay. I am not a big fan of seeking. Okay, I'm not a big fan of seeking 100% code coverage because I think it's dumb.
I think it's dumb because for the most part, you don't need 100% test coverage. There's things that you just don't need to test.
Because you don't need 100% test, since there are things that you don't need to test.
But if you want to, I'm going to show you how to cheat. There's a thing called snapshot testing, which in general I think is a bad idea.
There is a thing called snapshot that Brian Holt think that it is a bad idea. Okay.
But it's built into VTest, it's built into Jest. And
yep. But it's built in VTest. It's built in Okay, it's built in VTest. It's built in Jest. And it is very easy to set up.
And it's very easy. So what snapshot testing, it's low effort, low confidence tests.
Holy moly, what was that? Okay. So what snapshot are is low effort, low confident tests.
So they're very easy to write, but they inspire very little confidence.
Very easy to write, but inspire very little confidence.
So cheap tests that don't do much.
Cheap tests that don't too much. Ooh.
Now you have to ask yourself, is that a good thing for me? Do I like that? For me personally, they're too noisy for me, and I also don't get very much value out of them. But I'm going to show you how to write them nonetheless.
Okay. It doesn't provide too much value, and it is part of the code coverage. Okay. It doesn't provide too much value, but some companies want to do that. Okay.
So let's do it with results.jsx. I want you to create a file here, results.test.jsx. Here we're going to import, expect, and test from the test. And I'm going to import render from testing library React. And I'm going to import results from .. results. Okay? Test renders correctly with no pets. Async function doesn't have to be async, but I just make it async anyway. Then we're going to grab this thing out called asFragment equals render results pets equals empty array. Okay, and then we're going to say expect asFragment, which is a function, and you're going to call this magic function called toMatchSnapshot. Okay, as soon as oh, what happened here? Oh, it just doesn't have any tests, which is fine. So if I save this, it's going to say, hey, I wrote a new snapshot for you. Then you can look in the snapshots directory up here, and you can see that it renders out this document fragment here of what this looks like rendered to HTML directly.
Interesting. So let's go to write a test for results. Okay, makes sense. Yeah, let's go to write a test for results. So that actually let's going to do that. Okay, let's go to write a test for results. You say, hey, result.test.jsx. So here we're gonna import is this expect from vtest. Say expect and test. Thanks for that. And also I want to import from, in fact I want to import statement from a testing library. It's like the testing library, the render, okay, because we're gonna make is this code coverage. Part of that is snapshot, okay. All right, and we're gonna import is the component that must live is on result, okay. What you to get is the result for that. Nope. And then let's go to write our test. We just say here test a snapshot, right? Not sure. Renders correct with no pets. Render correct with no pets. Okay, renders correct with no pets. Async here. What you got is this. Async here. What you got is this, and you got is the cons here. Okay. Well, here we're gonna say let's go to render our result component. Okay, you can use this closing tag here as a shorthand, that this function will expose for ourselves something called asFragment. Makes sense. And then okay, and then okay, and then all right, we are going now to do something like this asFragment, and then we're going to run an assertion which we say, hey, expect that the asFragment, okay, to match snapshot. Okay, if we save this, we run that. It failed because we haven't passed any async. All right, so now it say, hey, as fragment is a function, renders correct pet, it say pet.len. You know, it's like, when the error happened on the result, what failed is a component. Yeah, are we passing something? I think this is exactly. It needs pets as an empty array. So now it generates a folder for us. Okay. So now it generates a folder for us here with this snippet, or with this fragment, document fragment. Okay. So it generates a snapshot. It generates a file under snapshot. Okay. Like this. So you got now is this. That's a snapshot. Yep. This is how this file will look like. You can take this and say, hey, as a way to provide is some background here to make things much more lovely to see. Okay, there you go. So
it's going to say, hey, I wrote a new snapshot for you. Then you can look in the snapshots directory up here, and you can see that it renders out this document fragment here of what this looks like rendered to HTML directly. And then now, every time that I run this, it's just going to compare this to what it was previously, right? So it's going to say, okay, this is what I saw last time.
And now I'm going to compare this with previously snapshot.
Does this look exactly the same this time?
Exactly. With previous snapshot. So does it look exactly like this snapshot? The test runner will ask.
So to prove my point here, let's look at results, and I'm going to put no pets found with a bunch of exclamation points, and I am going to get a failing test. Why? Because before I said no pets found, and now it says no pets found, exclamation point. That's exactly what it says it is. Like, I'm going to take a frozen snapshot of this, and then
Oh, Jesucristo. Pero es solamente aquí, marico. Es cuando estoy así en esta posición. Ok. Oh my God. Oh. No, señor. Mierda, bro. Es cuando estoy en esta posición. Ok. ¿Cuáles son posiciones? Ok, así. Ok. Son posiciones en las que duele. Ok. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to compare this in the future, that this is what I expect to see. Now, what I can do here is like, I can go and say, you know what, this is actually what I expect, right? I want this to now match that. If I just hit you now, it's gonna be like, all right, you're the boss. I'm gonna tell you now that that's what it's gonna look like in the future. So now if I open this again, notice that it says, it's okay, close this. Yeah, don't save. Please refresh it. And now if I say snapshot, you can see here, now it actually says what I have here. Refresh again. Boss, I'm gonna tell you now, here is like, I can go and say, you know what, this is actually what I expect, right? I want this to now match that. If I just hit you now, it's gonna be like, all right, you're the boss. I'm gonna tell you now that that's what it's gonna look like in the future. So now if I open this again, notice that it says, it's okay, close this. Yeah, don't save. Please refresh it. And now if I say snapshot, you can see here, now it actually says what I have here. Do you think that's useful? Maybe, sometimes. If you had something that truly you've never really expected to change, and
We
for some reason it's changing
can
underneath you,
change.
by all means, this could be a valid use case for that. For me, this is just testing that my UI is not changing, and I also expect my UI to change. I used to write a lot of these so that I could get 100% test coverage.
We can change this.
I don't think that's useful anymore, so I don't like writing these. The one thing I can show you here, let's go back and look. This is writing to match snapshot. If I put to match
It will
inline
fail.
snapshot, now I'm going to save this. It'll actually write this directly here if you don't want to have a separate file. That's up to you. Some people like that better, but that's totally up to you. What was I going to say about that? Yeah, I don't write too many of these anymore. But I wanted to show you how to do it in case you wanted to know how to do it. It is, some people find it very useful. This is snapshots is not just for React, by the way. You can do it with like JSON, for example, right? So if I have some JSON API response that I expect it to not change over time, I can just give it a JSON object instead of a document fragment, and that'll work as well. But as you can see, 2 lines here of testing stuff. Generates a test. Some people are really into that. I'll leave that to your discretion. So this is doing with no pets. If you want to see what it looks like with pets, let's just go nab this. I have some sample data here that you can grab really quick.
It says.
So let's go grab the sample data.
Okay, you're the boss.
I literally just took this directly from an API response.
Okay, you're the boss.
Go grab an API response. We'll just say right here, blah equals blah. We'll have to import static router as well.
Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, you're the boss here. And then let's going to press U to update all of your snapshot. You say when one snapshot was updated. To update snapshots. Okay. Do you find it useful? Okay. Because that's the whole point. Do you find it useful? For things that won't change, yes. API response. But for UI, is something that we shouldn't rely. But for UI, yeah, for API response, yes. For UI on element that won't change, you know, that won't change. Okay.
So import static router from React router DOM/server. Okay.
So what we're doing here is to write a test that actually is
And then down
renders correct with no pest.
here we'll write another test that looks relatively similar. Test renders correctly with some pets.
Okay. Okay. So if we want to do that, for example, in our result or in our pets here, we say test I'm gonna do this with renders correct. Yeah, renders correctly in this case. Like renders correctly. Renders correctly with paths. Okay, here we need to pass in some data for that, where this data is something that comes from the course here, from the research. You take a look at the question here that you got it. Okay, and then you got a testing React, testing React, basing testing React, mock snapshots here. I just want to get the data, sample data here. This is also that you can generate data as you want from any, for example, any large language model. Let's say ChatGPT, that kind of thing. It's up to you. Good. What? Exactly, all of this data. There you got it. So now, okay, we want is to, in fact, obsolete renders correct with no pets. Here is when we want us to say, hey, I want you to render the result, okay, only like that, and this result, I want you to get now the, since I want to see if you're actually render data properly, we can use is the find by, I think it is, which is find by ID, find by test ID, okay, and then we can now see if we're actually writing or if we are showing those elements properly. How so? By on the result pet tags here, like so, you add is this data dot test ID equals to it's gonna render is all of the pets. Okay, so so here what we can say is, say I want you to now give me the pets, okay, to see if you're actually render all of them, all of those elements properly. You can do is data test ID pets in plural. If you're doing that the way you want now to render this element inside of pets, it will be in this particular fashion, okay, which is a nested component. We can take a look at the yeah, like this. Yep, data test ID, and here because you know, okay, the challenge here is we're gonna add that element here, and we're gonna check, okay, the ID for that, okay, which means that, hey, I want you to pass this by index, and here I want to check if you're actually now render those elements with the proper ID index, right? And here you're gonna start by 0 or by the index that we're passing. So this is one way of how we can check if this component is actually render all of this element. Right now you're not able to see what I'm doing, but you will, which is here. As after we write our after we write this test, we can say, okay, now what we want to do, well, since result here doesn't is not using anything else besides that, but pet in fact is using something called like link. Okay, we need to actually mark that. Okay, this is when you started to render nested components. In our case is static router from the our React router. Okay, and the thing we're gonna see is we're gonna check is we're gonna say, hey, since we are passing the result as well as the pets with this array here called pets, right? That's right. Okay, we want to see if any of those elements that are getting there, but on the pets, on the pets, okay, we're going to see if any of those elements from the pets here, I want to do this. I want to await for that element that we call them pets in plural. We can say it's pet car, something like that, you know. Pet, you can say pet car, something like that. You can see, yeah, if the more you're using this, you can also perhaps sometimes have some name conflict, but so far so good. Pets car, and I want you to now take a look at if that component actually exists as it is. Okay, followed by the index. Okay, and see if the pet here is gonna now make our assertion. Hey, does pet, okay, which is an actual element, does pet element okay. Okay, in fact we need to do this, but it's inside of that. So the pets.car, so for example like this. Okay, another way to do that is to say, hey, you know what, instead of a result, we prefer to pass and add this thing here to the pet, where we say, hey, you know what, we're gonna add this data test ID pet car. You see pet, you say pet name. I'm gonna test this by saying pet, no, by saying is, hey, does the animal is actually showing the proper animal, something like that. And if we're actually is no, it must be here. Yeah, it must be up there. Yeah, it must be up there. Must be up there. Must be up there. Must be here. Because here's when you want to test this. You want to say, hey, all of these components that we're rendering here, do we get them?
And snapshot. There you go. You'll see that it wrote a snapshot. We can go back and look at our snapshot file. can say const as fragment equals render static router results pets equals pets.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. You'll see that it wrote a snap.
Yeah, but this is if you want to roll a
Right,
snapshot.
so now my tests are going to fail. And this is going to fail because it says Jacqueline, this one it's renderer, and you can do like a shallow render. So instead of actually rendering everything down to the pet level, it'll say basically instead of that, HTML. That's a bit better. If you're going to be doing lots of snapshot testing, I would suggest going to do that. I show you how to do that in V7 if you want to do that. Lots of snapshot testing, I would suggest going to do that. I show you how to do that in V7 if you want to do that. But I've decided to de-emphasize snapshot testing in this course because I don't think it's a good idea. I want you to be aware of it because you're definitely going to come across at a company that does it, but use it at your own peril. Does that make sense? Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm. Again, all of this was to generate is snapshot testing. This is all to generate is snapshot testing. Okay. This is all to, no, exactly, because this is all to generate is snapshot testing. I want you to expect that this fragment as fragment, okay, as fragment, which is a function, to match snapshot. So you're going to generate is a snapshot for that. So we take a look now at the result here. Spec as fragment to match snapshot. Pretty much like this. With an empty. And with this. And now it's rendering all of this. Okay, in the same, exactly, in the same for that. So if you take a look at the here, renders correct with no pets one. It says that one is obsolete, renders correct with no pet. Okay.
Two things about snapshot tests. You do check them into Git. Some people are hesitant to do that.
Interesting. You do check in the get. Yeah, you do. Yeah. Okay. Recommendations. You do check. You do check. Yeah, you do check on the GitHub. That's right. You do check on the GitHub.
That, like most people say, like don't check in machine-generated files. These ones you do check in, right? Because you want to check them later, right? So it's important that you do check these in Git, and never modify them directly, right? I think that makes sense. These should only ever be machine-generated. Please do not edit them by hand.
Greg Online just said, I found that snapshot test work well for API integration testing.
Or integration testing. Exactly. You do check on GitHub. That's right. And never edit directly. They should only be machine generated.
to Craig's point, I believe that snapshot testing is a much better use case of making sure that your JSON
Mm-hmm.
response shapes are not changing between your client and.
Exactly. Integration testing for things that won't change, yes. Like API response, JSON. For example, it's a company that actually is doing that.
It's basically like you're giving a guarantee from the back-end developer to the front-end developer, like a handshake agreement. This is what this looks like. Our tests are going to fail if these drift apart. That is a super valid reason to use a snapshot test, and one that I've done before. So, yes, I agree with that. But this is, it gets you towards 100% test coverage, right? So I'm going to go look at we're going to look at test coverage here in just a second. It's going to show results.jsx as being 100% test covered. What did we test? Nothing, right? That's why I don't like test coverage, is because it doesn't really tell you anything. Like I could cover this entire application in 5 minutes with snapshot tests. It would show with 100% coverage, and I would have 0% confidence in the tests, right? Your tests are only as useful as like how much effort and thought you put into it.
Dropping gems, bro. Value proposition of testing. Your tests, again, should. Exactly. Your tests are only useful as much effort you put it, as much effort. Yeah, your tests are only as useful as like how much effort and thought you put into them. Your tests are only useful as how much effort and thought. Damn it. Your tests are only useful as much as your tests are only useful as much effort and your tests are only useful as much effort and god damn it and thought you have put into them, or you put into them.
Let's go do coverage now that we've been talking about it. I think it's interesting to look at coverage. It's also cheap now to look at coverage. It used to be hard to set up in Istanbul. It's now very easy to set it up.
Exactly, with Istanbul. So this is a snapshot, and the other is go coverage. Testing coverage. Testing coverage. You got no, what was it? It's not here. It's like testing coverage. Okay, cool. Testing coverage. Yeah, let's going to do. Let's go to do coverage. Exactly. So let's go to do coverage.
I think it's interesting to look at coverage. It's also cheap now to look at coverage. It used to be hard to set up in Istanbul. It's now very easy to set it up.
Okay, let's go to do coverage. It used to be hard to set up Istanbul, which is a tool, but now it is very cheap.
So I think it's useful for you to look at, but don't let it be gospel. Like that's why I don't like companies that say like we maintain 70% test coverage. It's silly. It's a silly number.
It is good to have, not as a gospel.
It's for you to look at, but don't let it be gospel.
Exactly. So I think it is I think it is useful to look at. I think it is useful to look at but don't let it but don't let it be gospel. But don't let it be gospel. Oh my God. Don't let it be gospel. Gospel. Don't let it be gospel. Oh, but this is in Spanish here. Exactly. Don't let it be gospel. No, no permita que sea un evangelio.
Like that's why I don't like companies that say like we maintain 70% test coverage. It's silly. It's a silly number to try and achieve.
We like some companies say we maintain 70% test coverage.
Case, right? But it is useful to look at the report and see like, oh, okay, here's a bunch of things that I find very important about my app that are not being covered.
This, but for things like, hey, okay, this is the use cases. The use case, bro. For things like, hey, this is my app that is not coverage.
But it is useful to look at the report and see like, oh, okay, here's a bunch.
Exactly, but it's useful to look at the report. But it is useful to look at the report. But it's useful to look at the report and say,
find very important about my app that are not being covered.
okay, it's a useful to look at report to say things about my app that are not coverage.
Right? But it is useful to look at the report and see like, oh, okay, here's a bunch of things that I find very important about my app that are not being covered.
Exactly. So, but it's useful to look at report and say, here is a couple important things, important things in my app that is not coverage. That is not coverage. Okay. Or that are not being coverage. That are not being coverage. That are not being coverage.
So let's go ahead and set that up. We're gonna go back to our package.json momentarily. We're gonna add another script here under vtest called test::coverage, and all you're gonna do is vtest ---- coverage. Yes, yes, yes. If you can spell
Coverage.
that was a rough go of trying to spell coverage. All right, there we go, coverage. Here we go. So stop this, and then I want you to run npm run test::coverage. It's going to ask you, do you want to install something, and you just say yes. Just like that. Do you want to install vtest -c8? The answer is yes. Okay. It's going to give me this like really nice little output here of like, here's all of the files that you are covering with your tests. Here's how many percentage of statements that you're covering, how many branches, how many functions, how many lines. In this particular, you can see that in catch, or what is this? Use breed list?
The
Fetch
custom.
breed list, thank you. Lines 11 through 13 are not covered. So fetch breed list here, 11 through 13. We don't cover that this error gets thrown correctly, right? Probably okay. So that's pretty cool. But like, if you go here and there is a coverage, source/coverage, and I think there's an index.html in here. Yeah. So open that in your browser. This will actually give you like a nice interface. So I can actually go in here and click in this, and I can see, okay, this is what's not covered, right? This was covered one time. This was covered 2 times. If we go back and look at something like carousel, you can see like this line was hit 20 times. Like that's what those X's mean. How many times these were hit. So on and so forth. So you can see all of these files are covered. It's giving me a really rosy result right now, but it's not showing me all the files in my project that are not covered, right? So you can see here, for example, modal.jsx is totally just omitted here because I don't have any tests for it. But of the things that I've written tests for, I have 98% test coverage from my statements, right? And
Completely.
function coverage, so on and so forth. So if you've ever used Istanbul or NYC, which are relatively the same thing for the most part, this should look familiar. This is called an LCOV report, LCOV. I do not know what it stands for. This is actually being generated by a different test coverage tool called C8. I would suggest now, if you're on Istanbul or NYC, to just move to C8. C8 is actually the built-in test coverage tool to Node.js, so it's actually built into Node. It's much faster than Istanbul. Istanbul is single-threaded and sequential. It's very slow. They made NYC, which then became multi-threaded, like at least could be read in parallels, maybe a better way of putting that. And then now there's C8, which is actually built directly into Node.js, which is way faster because it's in C, right, or C++.
So now they're not using Istanbul, they're using now C8 for that. C8 for code coverage. Which is a nice thing for, take a look at reports that say, hey, this is the important apps these are important apps, these are important features in my apps that are not being covered. That is very important information. Output coverage report using Node.js built-in coverage. But I think this is for company to say, hey, look at us, what we're doing, this is it. That kind of thing is like, okay, yeah. Makes sense, okay.
But you can see here, it's compatible with test reporters for Istanbul. So the rest of your pipeline will look exactly the same. C8 is actually the built-in or NY 98% test coverage, showing me all the files in my project that are not before I have this, right? And 100%. So if you've ever used Istanbul or NYC, which are relatively the same thing for the most part, this should look familiar. This is called an LCOV report.
L-curve report. A numerical thread. L-curve L-curve report.
I don't know what it stands for. This is actually being generated by a different test coverage tool called C8. I would suggest now, if you're on Istanbul or NYC, to just move to C8. C8 is actually the built-in test coverage tool to Node.js, so it's actually built into Node. It's much faster than Istanbul. Istanbul is single-threaded and sequential. It's very slow. They made NYC, which then became multi-threaded, or like at least could be read in parallels, maybe a better way of putting that. And then now there's C8, which is actually built directly into Node.js, which is way faster because it's in C, right, or C++. But you can see here, it's compatible with test reporters for Istanbul.
Interesting. So use cases like so test not being covered. That's not being covered. Yeah, here's a couple important things in my app that are not being covered. That is important. That is important. That is important. Oh my God. That is important, man. Oh, nigga. Istanbul. Because Istanbul was single test. Not sure if Istanbul actually is still being used, NGC, for test coverage. Holy moly, 360K. Man, some. Okay. That's quite compelling and interesting. Oh my god. Okay. Istanbul. Test coverage made simple. Again. What is the value proposition of test coverage? You know? Because, yeah, what is the value proposition of test coverage? It's like showing off that you are able to test your functions, that your application. This is a. Okay. So the value proposition of test coverage is that you can look at this report to say, hey, here's an important thing. That's the value proposition of this. Okay? Or this is the value proposition. Let's say value proposition. Because exactly, it's like, what is it? What does it bring to the table? So the value proposition here is that it is useful to look at report and say, hey, here's the important things that that in my app that are not being covered, and that is important. Okay, so any test you define there, so it will go only to generate is a report from your test files. Exactly. Istanbul is, again, it is important to not don't let it gospel. Don't let it gospel. Istanbul is what is being used before, and I think it's this. Exactly. So Istanbul is what is viewed before, but it was slow, poor coverage, poor code coverage, you know, or it was slow since it was single thread on JavaScript, right? But now we got is the C8 report. Oh, there you got it. Okay, but now we got a C8, okay, which is V8 code coverage. Okay, like NGC C8 was just magically work. It being installed that and C8 no foo.js. Code coverage using is the, okay. Code coverage using is the native. No V8 code coverage here. When set Node.js will be set up outputting V8 JavaScript code coverage to the directory providing as an argument. Coverage is an output as an array of script coverage here. V8 JavaScript code coverage. For JavaScript developers. And it will tell you that, okay, because this is now built in V8 engine. All right. This is now developing Node. 2017. God damn it. Okay. Holy moly. So Istanbul was Istanbul was is what is being used before, but it was slow since it was a single thread. C8 is now the replacement since it is built in with the V8 engine. That node use. Okay, so the value proposition of testing coverage thing is snapshot. Okay. So what is the value proposition, bro? Value proposition. Okay, proposition makes a tons of sense. Makes a tons of sense. Makes a tons of sense. Oh my god. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So all you have to do. Okay, so all. So yeah. So all you have to do is to install. Okay, so all you have to do is to install or to write a script here. On the package JSON, when you say package JSON here, you say, hey, let's go to add now is a test coverage, where it tells you, yeah, with test coverage, the value proposition of this is to say, hey, here's some important things on my app that are not being covered. That is what important. And you say vid coverage for that. You say npm test, npm run test coverage vid test coverage. It say, hey, I expecting something, but there's an error parsing that. What kind of error will be? I don't. Oh, let me save that. And save that. And you say, hey, I would like you to install this missing dependency, which is code coverage C8, which is coverage from the V8 engine. Makes a ton of sense. Okay. It's a what the is this, bro? Well found here. Maybe throw because the version that we're using right now. Say no version here. Yeah. I think on that we are using is nvm use 18, right? Version 18.12. I think it is. If we run this, say, hey, would you like to install this? Please do that. You tell me, hey, I couldn't install this. npm yarn CLI 10 does not support Node 18. This version npm support. Okay. npm warn CLI. And what? 20. You gotta be freaking kidding me. This does not support that. You're gonna be freaking kidding me, man. Anyway, that's quite interesting. Which 18 version I'm supporting, man? Maybe less. It tells me that it needs is at least 1817, 1820. Anyway, nvm use LTS hydrogen. That's right. Which is the latest version 18. They say you need to run nvm install for that. Okay. nvm install, no version manager install this particularly Node.js version, or this LTS, long-term service. And then now I want you to run is the test coverage. Yes. And it failed because could not resolve dependency from B here, from the root. Could not resolve dependency from B test in this. Fix the upstream dependency conflict or retry this command with force or legacy parent to a second incorrect and potentially broken dependency resolution. For a full C report, you got is this. The issue here is that I say, hey, command failed because I want to try to install this without any version, and the version here is important.
So the rest, go looking here at fetch this. Hey, functionality.
And the version here matters. The version here matter.
For me, let's say I had like, I don't know, looking here at fetch this. Let's say that this error was very important. I could go in here and look at my test coverage and say like, hey, this is critical functionality. Now I know I need to write another test to cover this piece of functionality. That lets me know, am I covering the things that I find important about it? I got one more thing to show you here. This is going to be specific to VS Code for just a second. I have an extension here installed called the retest extension. This is heavily inspired by the Jest one, which you can see I also have installed here. I used to work with Orda. Orda's on the VS Code team. What does Orda work on now? I don't know. I think Orda has left Microsoft. But vtest is largely, they took everything that's great about the Jest extension and they just ported it.
Behold, generate from behold, next course started. But this is not course repo. Really? Because what I want to do here is to take a look now at the course and say, hey, you know what? I want to take a look at that. Follow me along here and say, hey, let's go over this C8 here. Click here to see the state of the project here. It's this one. But here on the package JSON, you must be installing a particular version of that. It's this one. This is the version. Yeah, for some reason it's actually not installing the proper version that we need to. Doesn't matter. Okay. And we say, please install this model here. Okay, no problem. It did that. npm run the test coverage to generate this nice little report, and there you got it. Exactly. There you got it. So here's when we can look at this and say, hey, good, because now we could generate this nice little report where it say, hey, this was generated from C8. Okay. This report stands for line number, well, I don't remember. But here it tells you is like, hey, here are some important things in my app that are not covered. That is important. That is important here. I think is quite compelling to say that. It's very, very quite compelling to say that. Like this here. Okay. And install the proper version and install the proper version. The proper C8 version. of that. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a tons of sense. Okay.
To retest. In order to make this work the way that we want it to, we'd have to go into your package.json and change this from test to be test watch. Because right, this was it's a watcher. Whenever I run test, oops, npm run test, it likes, one more time, here we go, npm run test.
It's because
Or no, I got rid of it. Test watch. Notice that it's sitting here, right? It's actually not.
it's sitting.
In order to get the extension to work correctly, you have to get it to just run once, and I can't remember how you do that. npm or npx test -- help. How do you get it to run once? I think it's just run. Okay, there you go. So what you want here is you want your test. So test to be test -- run like that. And now I think if I say npm test, it should just run once and exit, which is cool. It does that.
Which is great.
Now I can go here into my testing here. You can see this little beaker on the left. And I think I can just click run all my tests. And I can see all of my tests running here. I can click on this. I can show me in the file where this is. If we go to something like that, which has several tests, you can see it individually here and here, like the check marks. I can run them directly again from the browser. Let's say I'm messing with something and I'm here in carousel, and all of a sudden I change this to be active with something else. I can run my test directly again, and I can see here this is breaking, and I can go directly to that. You can say, hey, I expected this to be this, so it's actually going to inline all of my feedback directly there. I can see which assertion is breaking. Go back and fix that. Run my test again. I don't have the debugger set up, but you can actually run it directly in debugging, so you can debug your tests. Maybe it'll work. No, I don't think so. Yeah, I have to go set up all the VS Code stuff to get that to run. I'm not going to do that right now. But if you have all of your debugging stuff set up for VS Code, you can actually run it directly in the debugger and see piece by piece what's happening. So the key there to getting that working correctly is making sure that you have your npm run test runs just once, right? So that's why you have to move the watch, or vtest is just the watch, and then test is just run once. So if you're working in vtest, I strongly suggest that you download this extension. By the same token, if you're working in Jest, I suggest you run or install this. Okay. Any questions about that? We only have 7 tests, so like this is really not that many. But I'm sure some of you have worked on code bases with hundreds of tests. This can be very nice. It's nice that you can run them individually, right? I can come in here and I can actually say, hey, please only run this specific test and do not run the other ones. It's nice so you don't have to wait minutes for your entire test. I guess that's another nice thing about vtest and Jest in general. If I go break results and then I go back and run test again, it's actually going to go run the breaking test first. Right? So it's actually smart enough to show you only the breaking test and not rerun everything every single time. So there's a bunch of features like that that it does under the hood for. Again, inspired by Jest. Jest is really the one that came up with a lot of those just developer niceties, and then everyone's kind of been copying it ever since.
That's quite compelling and interesting, by the way. Especially if you want to install that vtest, if that is being installed. If that is being installed, that's what happened. If that is being installed, vtest and then you can run all of your tests independently. Vtest deprecated and vtest here. You can see here these little nice things here. Category testing. Oh, wow. Install additional test extensions. No, I don't want to. But how do I enable this?
Run them individually. So that's why you have to move the watch or install this one.
Oh, because you need to tell us that this is.
So if you're working in vtest, I strongly suggest that you download this extension. By the same token, if you're working in Jest, I suggest you run or install this one as well. Clean debugging, so you can debug your tests. And show me in the file where this is. Now I can go here into my testing here. You can see
vtest run. But is it because it goes through that script? Okay, vtest run. When I say vtest here, it's not sits there. No test has been found in this workspace. Oh, because
this little beaker on the left. And I think I can just click run all my tests. And I can see all of my tests running here.
That's quite interesting. It's like not detecting that with vtest. Is not supported. vtest 1.4 or newer is required. Oh, that's quite interesting.
I can click on this.
Maybe the older versions.
Show me in the file where this is. If we go to something like pet, which has several tests, you can see it individually here and here, like the check marks. I can run them directly again from. Get that to run. I'm not going to do that. By the same token, if you're the other ones, I have to show you only the proper niceties, and then everyone's kind of in sense.
Okay.
That is it. That is all of the intermediate React V5. Hopefully this felt like you expanded your React toolbox a bit more into the ecosystem so you kind of understand all the tools going around React. I feel
It
like
is.
you've done a pretty good job here covering most things that you're going to find applicable to writing React. Whether that's how do I work with TypeScript, or how does testing work with React, whether that's Mocha or Ava or vtest or something like that. If you like the course, please tweet at me. I'm always happy to hear stuff about that. Please start a repo. That's always awesome. Just to give you some next step projects, try to get 100% coverage on all the tests. Like try and write good tests. That would be another good thing to do here. Go back and finish the migration from CSS to totally on Tailwind CSS, which would be great. Try combining some of the sections. Like try TypeScript plus testing, or try testing plus Node.js.
Which is exactly what it did. It did this TypeScript with testing. That's exactly what it did.
Anything like that, or you can try putting them all together. That would be cool as well. And then, as always, I like seeing your final deploy project. So try throwing it up on Vercel and see what happens. And then the other one I was going to say is try putting this project together with something like Next.js or Remix, or one of those full stack React application kind of things. There's a Remix course on here from Kent. There's a Remix course on Front of Masters. Remix course from Front of Masters. There's a Next course from Scott Moss. All sorts of really cool stuff. Okay, before we wrap up, anyone have any questions? Yeah. Well.
Do you use Storybook for components? Would you recommend it?
Yeah, so there's a project called Storybook. And what Storybook is basically like, you can make individual components, and then you can make this living documentation around your components of here is my double drop down component. Here's all the props that it takes. Here's all the permutations of this thing. So it's kind of like a gallery of all your components. Super useful. If you have a design system, it's basically required that you use Storybook then. There's actually a whole company now that is behind Storybook, which I didn't know until recently. So I've only ever consumed Storybook. I've actually never set up Storybook for myself. Stripe uses Storybook, or at least did. I don't remember if they do anymore. Because we have our own design system, so there's a design systems team that makes all these components, and there's a Storybook for us to be able to go peruse how to use all of them. So it's basically generated documentation for components. So I've consumed it. I liked it. If you have those sorts of problems, I would suggest it.
And also mention we do have a Storybook course by Emma.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, check that out. Emma's great.
And shout out to the React Learning Path.
Shout out to the React Learning Path. There's lots of high quality stuff on there. I'm on there twice, so it has to be good. I'm just kidding. Learning paths, just down here, React. So these ones will be on here. You got the one from state management from Steve Kinney.
It'll be actually replaced with performance, React performance.
Oh, cool.
Which covers, of course,
Further in-depth performance stuff than I covered, yeah. Awesome. And then there's more. Yeah, Gatsby, if that's your speed. Working with Scotty's great. I used to work with David at Microsoft. These are all people that I like. So yeah, definitely go check that out. There's going to be lots of cool stuff for you to check out. But my favorite part about the learning paths in front of masters is they're constantly being updated, right? So awesome. And then there's more. Yeah, Gatsby, if that's your speed. Working with Scotty's great. I used to work with David at Microsoft. These are all people that I like. So yeah, definitely go check that out. There's going to be lots of cool stuff for you to check out. But my favorite part about the learning paths in front of masters is they're constantly being updated, right? So even if you've like looked at it before, be sure to go check it out again. All right. Hope you enjoyed the course. Thanks for sticking with me, and I will catch you back here probably for version 9 someday.
Shut up, man. Shut up to Brian Holt, bro.
The one from state management from Steve Kinney.
It'll be actually replaced with performance, React performance.
Oh, cool.
Which covers, of course,
These ones will be on here. You got the one from state management from Steve Kinney.
it'll be actually replaced with performance, React performance.
Oh, cool.
Which covers, of course,
Further in-depth performance stuff than I covered, yeah. Awesome. And then there's more. Yeah.
Okay. 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 That's why compelling. Okay, that's quite compelling, totally. Redux toolkit, previous life, asynchronous actions, thunk, and that kind of thing. Okay. Both of these courses are like a year old, right? Yeah, a year old. A year old. A little bit of year old. Okay. 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 So that'll be all for this video. And finally, from this course. So take care. Bye bye.